Dr. Janette Ok, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. So if you were going to give us your kind of high-level summary or paraphrasing of what your main claim, or maybe a couple claims are, what would that be?
Well, in my presentation, I was trying to re-examine theological education, specifically doctoral theological education, through the lens of intersectionality. And I'm trying to map what Kathy Park Hong calls minor feelings, and also the multiple marginalities experienced by BIPOC doctoral students onto their doctoral formation. I think my central claim is that multiple embodied marginalities require multiple strategies to really, multiple embodied strategies to promote not only the environment, but like structures, programs of study, relational networks and pathways for students to really thrive and to thrive throughout the program and beyond. I think in doing so, we create more just, less fragmented, more liberative, and humanizing doctoral formation for our students, but also for all students, not just for our students of color. But I just think that we think about diversity as physical presence of diverse bodies, but it's too often devoid of what makes them unique, right? And so we think of diversity in ways of like informing white students about people of color, right? Or another, so that would be like functional. Or we think of diversity in terms of adding numbers of diverse bodies to the pre-existing student body. But I think we also need to think about diversity in terms of epistemology or epistemic diversity, ontological diversity, and material diversity.
So unpack those a little bit for someone like me, just average Joe or Jane.
Yeah.
What on earth does ontological and epistemological diversity mean to you?
Okay, so like to be themselves, right? Learners who can have different ways of being in the world and ways of reading. So that's what I mean by ontological. By epistemic, I'm also talking about allowing for different hermeneutical horizons. So like we have different reservoirs of knowledge, or as Robert Chow Romero talked about, cultural wealth. And how does that inform our way of interpreting and knowing? And then by material, we have to pay attention to the economic dimensions of structural racism. And so that's just my unpacking of such terms.
Part of, as you think about the sort of material consequences or structures of it, you talk a bit about the desire and burden of being someone with various embodied intersecting identities. Wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. What, because not all students, BIPOC students, are going to come in saying, I want to address the structural elements of a doctoral program, but some might feel called, and either way, it's a burden, it seems like to me. So can you tell us a little bit about how those play off the desire to enact change, but also the burden that comes with that others might not actually bear?
Yeah, Trey Clark in his talk yesterday talked about the burdensome joy of preaching. And I think I thought that resonated with, at least I talk about from me. So I personally needed support beyond that which was often readily available. And I had to seek support, often from other faculty of color that weren't necessarily in my department, weren't necessarily in my institution. And I think about, now that I'm a faculty member, the generosity of what they offered me, the time, the mentorship, the care, the honesty. I think that is a service. It's a sacrifice. And I'm sure it was a joy, but a burden for them. And likewise for me, I meet with students that are not my students, that want to talk to me about certain things and be mentored in certain areas that are, I think, addressing those multiple marginalities and the minor feelings that are so hard to quantify. They're ineffable, but you feel it in the bones, you feel it in the folds. It's affecting their psychological, emotional, spiritual well-being and their processing of the programs in which they're studying. And so I want to be present for that. I know what it's like to need that, and yet it's a limited time and energy. So I think that part of what I think we need to also do is mentor students, not assuming they're all the same and have the same convictions, but to recognize and name that those are also realities of their need and also of service that faculty like me offer that are not paid for, that are not noticed. They're not part of tenure review. They're just, it's just part of my commitment to doctoral formation, my commitment to my students in general, but my commitment specific to students of color. Because I do think they experience certain challenges that require extra support.
Yeah. So why doctoral education? Is it, I mean, you have to focus somewhere, so maybe that's part of it. But is there something in particular with, and maybe you even define it, I don't know if you're thinking PhD in particular, if you're thinking DMin and other sort of applied doctoral programs. What about the doctoral supervision, mentorship, et cetera, that relationship is important to you when it comes to theological education?
There are studies that show that students of color, regardless of, or across disciplines, across institutions, across gender, that they experience what is, they often express this idea of, am I crazy? Like, am I crazy? And it's so interesting because I thought that so many times during my doctoral work. And so when I read Kathy Park Hong's book, which she's not a psychologist, but she's a poet, she's a novelist, but she talks about minor feelings. And somehow that really resonated with me. And minor feelings, as she's trying to describe the Asian American psyche, it refers to those negative, dysphoric, untelegenic emotions that are often the result of sedimented experiences of racism and this sense of, this reality of being often dismissed or not taken seriously for one's views. And also it expresses itself in this idea of, am I crazy? Right? Like where, am I crazy for the thoughts and questions I have, but also for thinking that some of this is steeped in racism. And so I think for me, not personally, but also in studies that I've read, and doctoral education can be particularly challenging for students who are underrepresented. And I think there's a lot of unspoken acculturation that's required, and it's not described. There are very few maps or pathways. And how do you mentor people to not only navigate, and to survive, but to even thrive and make it to the other side, and not just ways of mimicking whiteness, right? But in ways that they can be their full selves, and challenge this idea that to be legitimate biblical scholars or doctoral students, you basically have to engage with white questions and white concerns, and that is what makes you transition from yourself to being now legitimate. And I think that I focus on doctoral education because I think that it's an area where the epistemic and ontological diversity is crucial, because when it's overlooked, and it creates psychological impact. And and we're talking about embodiment in theological education. And so hence that's where my focus.
Well, as you're talking, tell me if this is right. It sounds like in some ways, let's imagine a master's program in a theological institution, Fuller, let's imagine. And most of that education is descriptive. The project that students are going through is sort of being introduced to a certain domains of thought, thinkers, et cetera. But what we're asking them to do formatively is kind of to describe the landscape. When you shift into doctoral education, in some ways, you're being shaped in how to think about it, how to analyze, how to be a scholar, if you will, so that then we can credential you and say, yes, you're allowed to go teach others. And so that sort of formation into a way of thinking and being is a little more, not rigorous is right, but what would be the word? A little more demanding on the person than maybe master's level. Is that kind of what you're getting into?
Big, I think it was Robert who talked about the ecological transition for Latino students into the higher education, but I think that ecological transition is even larger from master's to the doctoral level, because yes, you're not only learning what to think, how to think, but when your ways of being, ways of thinking are being challenged at a fundamental level, are being seen as a deficit, that's really problematic.
So if you could just stop being you'd be a great scholar.
Exactly. And I think about, when we talk about loving the Lord your God with all your mind, with all your soul, your strength, your heart. Well, we don't really encourage doctoral students, I would say, if we're not going to really embrace these other ways of ways of being and reading and knowing, to love God in their full selves. And I think that we need to also love them as we love ourselves. And a lot of the ways we love ourselves in the doctoral structure, the structure of the academy, is unspoken. But it's by centering it's the unquestioned authority given. And I want to question that, but also to value and give credence to and take seriously the questions and concerns often arising out of lived communal experience. And that can map onto doctoral studies. Right now, it's like fragmented, right? It's like, and how do we make it more cohesive, more holistic, so it's not fragmented in our students,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, doctoral studies in some ways makes all people a little less human. You know,
sad,
yes, yeah.
right?
So you're also exposing, I think, just the underlying pathologies of what we're demanding from a scholar.
I mean, doctoral education in itself is not for the faint of heart.
No,
Right?
no.
It's highly demanding, cognitively, emotionally, physically. There's a lot of sacrifices involved, the student life around them. And the imposter syndrome is real, like it's a real thing. But, what happens when, you have that imposter syndrome, but how racialization and racism, how that exacerbates and complicates that, right? And then what about comments like, oh man, I wish I was an African-American man or an Asian-American woman, then I could get into a doctoral program, or then I could get a job. What do you think that kind of logic, it's not the right way of thinking, but that is not uncommon. And really, are people going to admit that way of thinking? But I've literally been told that, right? So what does that say about what I contribute, my capacities, my competencies? What does it say about my unique offerings? What does it say about some structural and systemic realities that are just not even considered in it, right? And so I think that exacerbates, it's just a small example of how minor feelings gnaw at and can really discourage doctoral students very early on. And I think it can hinder progress in their program. Many have overcome, but you carry the weight of that, and you carry it with you over the years too. It's this sedimented experiences. It really does make you crazy or feel crazy.
So I'm imagining then that means multiple approaches means multiple different embodied versions of faculty who need to be mentoring multiple different people with intersecting identities.
Yeah.
So imagine you're a person like, let's say, me. What does it look like for those from a dominant perspective or don't have as many marginalized identities to be in some sort of relationship with students of color that would be life-giving, that would enable them to sort of navigate? Because what you're describing puts a lot of burden on you, right? So how do I, as a faculty member in the doctoral program, help bear that burden and share that equally with you in some ways?
Well, I know there's a lot of economic challenges to this, but I think it's really important to have like a long-term game of recruiting and hiring faculty, staff, administrators, appointing board members who are embodying racial, ethnic, gender diversity, but also ontological and epistemic diversity. So I think that's important. You got to share the load, right? And I think going back more, I think there needs to be this again long-term game of recruiting, having targeted initiatives for recruiting master's and MDiv students who we see who might have interests in doctoral studies, who talk about it, or who you see, that you might see that spark to cultivate, encourage, and support a trajectory towards considering the possibilities toward doctoral education. I know there's job market and all that stuff, but still there's a need for more diverse students and scholars. And we need to commit to investing in developing, I think, earlier and supporting the process. And that I think fostering and advocating for diverse approaches and viewpoints, concerns in your syllabi, like in your classrooms, but also the interests of your students. So when I talked about some of the work I wanted to do, one of my well-meaning professors told me, you want to do work that has a long shelf life. In other words, your work is too ethnic-y. To borrow a quote from Park Hong. Do I want to do work that has a long shelf life? What does that mean? Right? There's a lot implied there. that I thought about for years to come. But I think that we have to think about the concerns of these students as well, the kind of interests they have. Not to overstate the case, but students often who experience social inequity, social injustice, actually care about that, not only in their personal life, but in their actual scholarship and work and in their activism in their work. And so how do we encourage that versus it being always adjacent, always in the marginalized spaces, not part of actually the work and the process of their formation? I think that's a way to help, a way to foster. I think even if one has not experienced certain realities, I think we have to be willing to find ways to equip and prepare our students, our BIPOC, especially underrepresented doctoral students, to negotiate these complex, often conflicting dilemma that's unique to their embodied pressures. So we talked about the burdens, but the joys, the commitments, the inordinate demands placed on faculty and also doctoral students. Will you participate in this chapel? Will you be interviewed for this student? Why you should come to your institution? I mean, that places undue stress on them. It serves the institution well, but it places often undue stress on them. Not that they don't want to serve or give of themselves, but it could also disadvantage their chances for getting work done, for promotion, for tenure, for advancement, their time, right? And so we need to be able to name that and make adjustments for that reality. And I was just like naming the things I participated in this year. Like, it's a lot of things, and I said no to a lot of things. And do I regret it? No. But was it taxing? Yes. Life-giving, taxing, both. It's like often conflicting dilemma that I'm constantly negotiating. And I wish I had some conversations about this, some mentorship about it, some naming of it to help me in that process. And discernment too, like just to be able to talk about the pros and the cons and, reflecting on what to say yes to, what to say no to, what do I want to hold off on, in the time being. I think providing culturally relevant support systems, including peer mentoring, professor mentoring, but also like psychological supports. These are proven to help students. And sometimes the institution lacks it, but we can connect students to external support systems. And I think that means the faculty and administrators need to know what's out there to connect students to. And if we have mentorship that we provide, or if we know that they're being mentored by other people, are there ways to acknowledge and honor that work, that unspoken labor that serves our students? Is there compensation or honorarium or recognition for that kind of care? And it's not just pastoral care or scholar, it's formative. It's making them better scholars, better servants of the gospel, better teachers. And so I think advisors in support, we need to do more than support the research and writing students, but to provide what I call advocacy-oriented doctoral advising. Not just doctoral advising, but advocacy-oriented. Recognizing the impact of these multiple dimensions and oppressions of underrepresented students. When we recognize it, then you don't just name it, you actually have to now do something about it to create scholarly, professional, and personal development, and to promote structures. I think that's important. Pathways, relational networks that are going to actually help them get through the program, not just only survive, but thrive, and to continue on this work, however the Lord leads. And I think that means intentionality. It means research, study, that the professor himself needs to expand their own networks so they can be better teachers, better mentors, right? And I think that's not natural to do because they're busy, and it wasn't what they needed.
Yeah, and it wasn't what they were trained in.
Exactly.
Right? They were almost trained in the opposite. It makes me think most doctoral programs that I know of really are designed to, at the end, you've just barely survived. Congratulations.
It's like a hazing.
Like that almost
hazing,
is what proves that, we did a good job training you because you limped across the finish line.
And it's hard. I mean, it is hard. It's like, I'm not denying the challenge and the rigors of doctoral education. But it doesn't have to be so demeaning, so demoralizing, so dehumanizing and disembodied.
Yeah, I think that's what is really compelling to me about what you're saying. A couple just things that come to mind. One, the other sort of pathology of it is this urge to have something of permanence, right? This like a long shelf life. I mean, I was just actually the other day talking to someone, and this reflects sort of my social location that I can say this. I'm like, oh, I don't think a single one of my books has a shelf life. Like, and I was like, I think there's value in recognizing even books. Now books are in print, they like exist as this artifact that we think are timeless. I'm like,
Fire fodder.
Yeah, they really are. I'm like, they're here for maybe 6 to 9 months if I'm lucky. They'll be hopefully impactful, and then after that, I need to move on. So the very idea that your scholarship is something for all time and all places forever is a reflection of, I think, that pathology. But then to suggest the reverse, that, would you call it ethnic-y?
Yeah.
It's too ethnic-y? That wouldn't be an enduring, like that is a sort of,
in vogue, like a trend.
in vogue, trendy
Right.
thing. I'm like, that is the inverse problem. To
That
suggest,
really disregards one's whole being.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
As it's in vogue or it's a trend. It's got a short shelf life. Well,
it's trendy now, but especially if you're Asian or Asian American, I mean, that's only 2 billion people of the population, probably just something that'll come and go. You mentioned also this kind of going out before someone's pursuing necessarily doctoral studies and saying we need to be intentional and strategic about recognizing what I would call potential and encouraging and sometimes maybe even giving those people for the first time they've ever even considered it, the idea of, hey, would you pursue doctoral study? And I found in some students that they're like, oh, I've literally never thought of it, but now that you simply say it, it sort of opens up a whole new possibility. So it'd be interesting to hear you just talk about your experience. Were you always like, I'm gonna go be a New Testament PhD? Or is there some moment where someone said, hey, have you ever thought about this trajectory? And did that sort of chart your path moving forward?
Well, it was my freshman year at UCLA. I was in a class with Scott Barchi, and it had this kind of epiphany. I'm like, I'm going to bypass a lot of my other, past here, but where my love for nerdiness and scholarship, for texts, my love for the church, because I had this desire to be a pastor, and my growing sense of loving, particularly the New Testament, converged. And and it was just like this, I'm just in class taking notes, like it wasn't like a particularly special moment, but for me, the idea, oh my gosh, maybe I could become a New Testament scholar. I don't even know what that means. I don't know anyone in my life who is one. And I'm not not in a seminary context. I'm at a public university here, and this is like a history class on early Christianity. But I thought, okay, like maybe that's a possibility. I remember going to his office, and I was like, how do I do what you do? He took me seriously, and he gave me some really practical steps. And I remember writing it down, in my journal and pursuing that. But it wasn't just that. But there were so many challenges along the way. But I had to say that when I went to seminary, there was this like literal, like a poster in the mailroom that said, nurturing next generation of scholars. There was like some event in Atlanta funded by the Fund for Theological Education, which is now
Forum for Theological Exploration. Still FTE.
Changed the name, but FTE had this event. And I applied for it, but in applying, it required letters of rec from professors. So even that, letters of rec are significant, And so the fact that a professor or two would have taken the time to send me gave me a sense of courage, right? Because I'm still exploring. And then I go to this, and when I think back on that event, it was so formative because most of the people there were professors who have experienced a similar kind of fraud and a journey, and they were sharing about it, but giving advice and things that I just couldn't get in my home institution. They do, and but also my peers there, a lot of them became professors and scholars in their own right. And I think about how formative that space, that opportunity, the place to be myself, to ask questions I couldn't ask in class. I didn't feel like I could even ask my professors. That was empowering and emboldening, and I still had a lot of work to do. I still had to study the languages. I still had to take classes, but that was a formative and important opportunity outside of what my MDiv offered, structure formally, but also other things along the way. But a lot of it I had to seek on my own, and I had to pay out of pocket also to get to them. But I didn't do it. I did it out of like an existential need. I needed to do it to survive. I needed these relationships. I needed this mentorship. I needed that space to be myself. And I realized, kind of like when I was a kid and growing up in Michigan, you don't think about assimilation as a kid, but you feel it because it's like you're holding your breath, and you're constantly surveying the land and making adjustments, adapting. You're hyper vigilant and observant, and it's almost like in Matrix, like Neo's like going back, like you're trying to adjust and adapt to make sense of how you're supposed to behave. And I think to be able to not have to worry about that, it's healing, it's empowering, and it gives space to explore and ask questions that otherwise aren't, aired.
I mean, it sounds exhausting just listening to you
It
describe
is exhausting.
much
I'm
less
going to
experience
acknowledge
it.
that.
Yeah.
It's real,
Yeah.
whether we're always aware of it or not.
Mm-hmm. But as we think now about the future of our institution at Fuller, and then maybe theological education broadly, what are some of those things you're hopeful about? What are the things, if we made some of these adjustments, all of them, what does that look like on the other side as we kind of rethink and reshape what we're doing in the classroom?
Yeah. Well, one thing I really hope for at Fuller, and I think is one of the unique gifts that Fuller has and can continue to bring, is not only do we form leaders everywhere, we form pastors for the church, but also we can form and train up scholars for the church. And they're not opposing commitments. They're actually very correlated. They overlap a lot, they converge. And I think a lot of times our faculty in seminaries do not reflect the realities of our churches. And I think we are not even close to having recruited and supported and developed doctoral students to really meet the on-the-ground realities and needs of the church. And not only in pastoral needs and things, but also in ways of thinking, ways of doing theology, ways of preaching, being, and interpreting, for example. I think our congregations hunger and need, whether they name it or not, they need that in their own transformation, in their own discipleship. And so the kind of, I'm naming the problem, but I'm also trying to name constructive possibilities. But in doing so, it not only nourishes and helps develop and promote the thriving of BIPOC doctoral students, but the students they're going to teach, the pastors they're going to equip, who are going to serve the church, or them being in ministry directly, or there's, I think it's not just for BIPOC students, it's for their own benefit, their own formation, and their own expansion of what it looks like to be a part of the kingdom of God. I think hermeneutically, something that I really think is important, like 1 Corinthians 12:9, Paul talks about how until the perfect comes, we only know in part, we prophesy in part. That in part is where people like me can offer a lot. Because too many times it's like, we see in whole, prophesy in whole. And I don't need, it's just an optional, addendum to the curriculum, or a guest speaker every 2 years, a guest interview once in a while. That's very superficial. It's not acknowledging that I cannot, me and my interpreting community, my community of faith, God gives each church gifts, right? But we lack, and we need more. We need the larger body of Christ. And so, like the analogy of the round table, we need to bring in new conversation partners, not just for fun, to be cool, for our liberation, for our transformation, for our discipleship. And I think if we see it that way, we're not going to just be topical about it. It's not just functional diversity, not just additional diversity, but ontological, epistemic, material. And that commitment is thoroughgoing. And I think we still have this like zero-sum idea. So, okay, then that means there'll be no more, are there going to be no more white pastors? I don't think we're going to come to that problem anytime soon. But think about even just that logic, right? And I think Soong-Chan Rao talked about the, what did he say? Like the one, the logic of, you only need one.
Yes.
African-American, one Latinx, one Asian American. You know, like one is enough. One woman is enough. Like, and then that kind of shifts, but that's so superficial. And the lack of critical mass also creates too much onus, too much burden on that individual to affect systemic structural change. And so we need to be willing to reconfigure space, reconfigure our, the way we invest financially, reconceive of our needs in our formation, to be more inclusive of people who think and who have experienced and who offer things that are quite different, right? Not necessarily lacking overlap, but often in a way that might require a break in thought, a reconsideration of what one always conceived of as the way it was, right? And that's not easy and not comfortable. I think this kind of, Brian Blunt calls it border crossing, hermeneutically, it's painful. And I think we have to be willing to acknowledge and prepare ourselves and posture ourselves for that kind of spirit-filled disruptions to the hegemonic ways of thinking that we just take for granted as the way it is. I think that's, I don't think that's the work of humility or the spirit or seeing in part.
Thank you very much for this, for your time, and for your contributions here. Excited to see where the article goes.
It's a pleasure, never a dull moment with you, Kadir.